Anything less than an incredible relationship is not worth your time. You might as well just stay single and keep working on your goals, because there's going to be a huge commitment into any relationship. Welcome back to another episode of the Nomad's Notebook podcast. Like always, my name is Joe Maxwell. Second straight episode, no script, so bear with me, but I think I'm getting a little better with each one. How's everyone's week been? Let me know how things are going for you. I've had a pretty good week. I'm maybe a little tired today, a little more so than I had been the rest of the week. I had some pretty demanding meetings, which is not really ideal. I kind of like to reserve Fridays as being an easy day if possible, but obviously schedules don't always allow for that. But with that said, I'm always comforted when I can come down here into this little makeshift studio, which I've slowly been improving over time. I got some new backlights. You can't see them. They're just out of frame. Really excited about it because I'm geeking out on things here. But the shadows on my green screen behind me aren't going to be as visible, and it just makes the editing process a whole lot better. So it's been over a year in the making now, gathering all these different pieces of equipment to run this thing. But I think I have what I need to take this thing to the next level. So I'm really excited about that. I'm also looking forward to this trip I have booked super last minute. I'm going to Mexico on next Saturday, so a week, 8 days. Sorry, my math is just a little funky there, but I'm going to a yoga and meditative retreat in Mexico. It's in the jungle, and it's designed for solo travelers. And if you know anything about me, about this show, solo travel is a huge part of my life. I wish it was a bigger part of my life, but I get out any chance I get, and I'm really looking forward to this trip. It was last minute because, I'll be honest, this kind of leads me into my first topic of the day, which is relationships. I went through a breakup recently with my ex-girlfriend, and we had planned to take a trip together into Mexico, but obviously, luckily, we didn't actually book it, or that would have been a huge nightmare to have to deal with. I left my schedule open, and I just wanted to get away for a couple of days. Going into relationships, it's a big topic that I want to discuss. So this most recent relationship, it was pretty short-lived, and it didn't work for a couple reasons. Out of respect for my ex, I'm not going to go into it too detailed. Looking back on it, if I'm being totally honest with myself, I wonder if I was a bit on the rebound with that relationship and maybe jumped into something faster and more or less cautiously than I would have otherwise done. And that was coming off of the back of another breakup that happened in August, which is, I guess, 6 months or so ago. And that relationship was much longer. It was over a year long, just over a year, maybe 14 months, which is a long relationship for me. That was the longest relationship of my life. It seems most of my relationships are very short-lived, and I've been trying to figure that out, but I have been seeing a pattern. And I wonder if it's linked to ADHD, which I haven't been diagnosed on, but probably have to a certain extent, right? A lot of people do. With interest like things, interest in life, I've noticed I can very quickly grow tired or grow bored of something and then move on to the next thing. And as destructive as this thought process can be, I wonder if subconsciously I apply that to my relationships. I'm not sure, but does anyone else have any thoughts on that connection? My long distance relationship, that was the one before this most recent one, was actually really great, and we had a lot in common. There was a few things that got in our way, and it was mostly just the distance, and it got to a point where she was needing me to make a decision about moving just a lot earlier than I was comfortable doing, and I just wasn't ready to do that. So we had to part ways. And that can always be a difficult thing in relationships when it's things outside of the two of you. Like the two of you are really good and you're very compatible and you have similar interests and you have fun together. But when it's external things like family or distance that gets in the way, that can always be very heartbreaking. But those situations are nice because they leave things open for friendship down the road. Now, we haven't really stayed in touch, and that's probably mostly by my doing. I think things are simpler that way. Can you even be friends with an ex is a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I think you maybe can in select situations, but I think it gets really difficult because the lines can get blurred when the other person wants to start seeing someone else, and feelings can get hurt, and you aren't able to move on. It kind of stunts that healing process of relationships that, for me at least, is already slow enough. But I do have some thoughts on long distance relationships, and this is getting to be a bit of a rambling episode, which I'll probably edit some of it out. But for me, I actually found I had really good success in a long distance relationship. Now, that's coming from someone who's maybe not the most emotionally needy person, or I can be, but I rarely tell people that. I rarely let on. I usually keep these things to myself. And I'm also fairly busy, right? I have a reasonably demanding job that takes, 40 to 50 hours a week. And then I have a few side hustles, including this podcast, that take up pretty much all of my free time. So it doesn't leave me a whole lot of time for going on dates or late night conversations. Plus, I'm really routine oriented. And I find anything that pushes me out of that routine, I get almost angry at the person or the thing that's pushing me out of that routine. So that can be a challenge, but long distance relationships actually make it very easy to navigate those things because you see them every month or two, right? And you go fly down and see them, or you take a trip to see them. But other than that, it's like even a daily phone call. You can do that on your drive home, and then that's the extent of your commitment to that relationship, more or less, right? And it's maybe good and bad because you don't grow with this person, not really, unless you're visiting them often, but that can get expensive. But you also get to stay safe in your own routine. So it's comfortable, but maybe that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. That relationship ended. It was really sad, but after a few months or so, I was kind of ready to get back out there. And I found myself involved with a woman who was maybe a little more emotionally needy than I was comfortable with, needed more than I was just able to provide. And that's a common theme that I've started to see as I've gotten older. I dated a decent amount when I was in college, but the dynamic was so much different dating girls aged 18 to 21 or 22 versus women in their late 20s, right? Because biologically, I think women get to a point by that age where they know they need to settle down. If they have a hope of having children one day, they need to find that man who they're going to marry. Whereas men, I almost, when I was younger, wanted to settle down more than I do now in my mid-20s because I feel like I'm just coming into myself now. I'm just starting to make money. I'm just starting to become successful. I'm just starting to become interesting because honestly, I've had the money to fund travel experiences and education and podcasting equipment and all this stuff that makes me a more interesting person. So I'm almost feeling less friendly to the idea of settling down now than I was 4 years ago. But with women, it seems the opposite, right? And I think that's because of how society values men and women. It's very different. Men's value is derived from what they do, what they bring to society, how much money they make. And that's something that's usually developed with age, right? I mean, there's those one-off 21-year-old Iman Gotzi guys who day trade or whatever they do, and they make $1 million when they're 19 or 20 years old. But for the most of us, it's really not until our late 20s, early 30s that we start to see some legitimate success, right? And that's when I think we become less needy because we're more sure of ourselves and we've achieved more. Whereas women, their value is derived on how they look. That's pretty much it. And I'm not saying this is right, by the way, but it is fact. Maybe women should be able to derive more value from what they bring to the table. Certainly for me, when I'm dating, ambition is a huge thing that I look for, and a woman having a plan for her life and, what her career is, how much money she makes. Those things are somewhat important to me, maybe more so than other guys. Looks are too as well, but maybe women should be able to derive more value from what they do rather than what they look like. But by and large, facts are facts, and the majority of their value is just based on how they look. When a woman is 21 years old, she has the world at her fingertips, right? She's at her peak physical attractiveness. So why would she want to settle down with a guy? But as she gets older, say 28, well, now she's starting to age a little bit, right? And I think aging hits women harder than it does men. And she's starting to, she's getting to that late middle threshold of being able to have children. And there starts to be some urgency there about settling down. Whereas men in that age, if they're on the right trajectory, are totally the opposite. So that's a challenge with dating that I've found as I've dated some older women, is they're just pushing for things that I'm not really ready for yet and may not be for quite some time. And that's been a process too. Like looking back when I was in college, really 19 to 22 years old, I was so needy and I just craved the attention of any female who would look my way because I honestly didn't have a lot of self-esteem, if I'm being totally honest. And that's been a huge focus of mine as I've gotten older, since I've graduated college and started working and developing hobbies and traveling, is just filling my life full on its own and becoming a high value person just to myself has enormously helped my self-esteem. And I don't feel nearly as needy in relationships as I used to. So it's so cliche. People will tell you, oh, you need to go out and find yourself before you start dating. It's cliche for a reason though, because I think it is important to get to a point where your self-esteem is high enough that you're not going to be so clingy in a relationship that you push someone away and just ruin the whole thing before it can develop. That's what I did when I was a younger guy. I would push women away because I was so needy. I just craved this attention. I was the one pushing them into things that they weren't ready for, mainly like talking about marriage way too early. But in the last couple of years, I've noticed that role has totally shifted and I'm on the other side of things. And I understand it is kind of gross when someone is too clingy and they're wanting more than you're ready to give and they're pushing you into commitment before you're ready for it. It's repulsive, to be honest. But at the same token, I still get lonely, right? I spend a lot of time alone. I live alone. And I do crave companionship, particularly from a female. So I think that's what pushes me to continually pursue women. But something I've noticed lately is just this kind of universal law of the world that you never get something for nothing, right? And I've kind of started to look at relationships. I'm not sure this is the most healthy view, but I've started to look at relationships similar to a 9-to-5 job. A relationship is going to give you companionship. You're not going to be as lonely. You're going to have some fun times. You got a buddy to travel with. You get sex regularly. Hopefully, if you're not, get the hell out of that thing. But with that comes some contingencies. You have to be responsible to an extent for someone else, right? They're going to have expectations of you. They're going to want things from you. And if they're not getting those things from you, then they're going to be unhappy and they're going to cast this cloud over your life, right? You get all these nice things that you like, but it comes with something that you have to bring to the table as well. And I've started to see that in comparison to a 9-to-5 job. 9-to-5 job hopefully pays you pretty well. You get a consistent paycheck every week or every 2 weeks whenever you get paid. It allows you to pay your rent, buy some food, keep yourself clothed, and maybe take a few trips now and then if you make enough. But with that comes the contingency of during business hours or maybe even outside of business hours, depending on your company, you have to do what your boss asks you to do during that window, right? You just have to, even if you hate that thing, even if it drains you emotionally and you don't have any interest in it, you have to do it. And if you refuse to do it, then you lose that job, right? So we don't get nice things for nothing is the point of this little tangent that I'm going on. So as far as relationships go, what this most recent experience has left me thinking is I'm not jaded. Like, I'll be honest, this relationship, I ended it. That's made the healing process quite a bit easier. In fact, I didn't really feel that hurt at all. I cried the day of, but after that, I was pretty much back to normal. It wasn't this huge, like months or years long healing process that honestly I've had in the past. I've been really torn up about some breakups in the past. This one was real quick. Maybe I just wasn't as into the person. I'm not sure. I'm not jaded. That's the point. I'm not totally against all relationships. What it has left me with is this conviction that anything less than an incredible relationship is not worth your time. You might as well just stay single and keep working on your goals, because there's going to be a huge commitment into any relationship. Time, emotional energy, money. And if that's anything less than stellar, I might as well just be putting those resources into myself.